Mickey Bergman is the Vice President and Executive Director of the Richardson Center for Global Engagement. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. And Mickey, we just heard Sarah Sanders say that there have been some positive steps, but there have also been some steps, according to the Trump administration, that suggest that North Korea is building up its missile program. So who should be believed in all of this?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the first summit, while it was a good moment between the two leaders, did not produce any framework for negotiations. And so what we've seen in the last 6-7 months since that summit has been posturing and positioning on both sides to create that framework. It's not traditional, but it's been playing out in front of us. So one day we see the North Koreans blowing up missile testing sites, and the other day we have a report that they're building new sites. One day we're saying, the Americans are saying we have good steps, and another day we're trying to apply maximum pressure. In other words, all of this is positioning. The summit, the announcement of a second summit, is a positive step because that's the only way to entangle where we've been at over the last 6-7 months. And hopefully the second summit will produce what the first summit should have produced, which is a clear framework of negotiations. Not an agreement, but a framework for negotiations.
Doesn't this, though, also essentially elevate, once again, the prestige of Kim Jong-un, which is something that is so very important to him, at least in terms of his own domestic situation?
It certainly does. But I think both leaders, after the first summit, both leaders got what they needed out of it in terms of the historical moment for President Trump, the president of that, the prestige for Kim. And they let the process kind of slide for a while. Obviously, President Trump is Kim's preferred negotiating partner, not Secretary of State Pompeo. Otherwise, we would have had progress in between. There might be different reasons and calculations for Kim why he prefers to have Trump in front of him, but that's a key element to it. But if you remember, one of the concessions that President Trump did at the first summit was to freeze the military exercises. Those exercises are coming back again in this spring, or that's typically their schedule, which means that they're starting to have pressure on President Trump from the military, from outside sources to say, hey, if we're not making progress on this, we need to renew our exercises, and having those exercises will break down the negotiations. So it's a mutual interest of both leaders at this point to move towards the summit before the spring exercises.
Do you expect that this second summit would produce some sort of framework agreement?
I do. I think that before the first summit, the way I understand President Trump, he trusts a lot, he puts a lot of trust in himself and his ability to convince leaders one-on-one on different things. And he wanted to do that first. So unlike any other presidential summits that we've seen in the past, not in North Korea, of course, but Russia, elsewhere, where staff does work in advance. So the summit actually, the outcomes of the summit are determined before. This has not happened with the first summit. I suspect, and I hope that for the second summit, staff is now going to use that as a leverage to create a framework that will be agreed, or as close as possible to be agreed, before the two leaders meet, so they can sign it and announce it at the summit. I do believe that that's going to be the plan.
And how do you measure success? In other words, in this framework, does there have to be some sort of timeline? Does there have to be some sort of specific process that's laid out in terms of how the North would denuclearize their forces?
So a couple of thoughts of that. First, I think, yes, there needs to be a framework. There needs to be at least saying, okay, every couple of weeks the teams meet in area X. Here's the frames, the topics of discussion, the definition of what denuclearization actually means. Those things are important for the nuclearization, for the nuclear negotiations. There are other elements and tangible elements of what came out of the first summit that we have to keep pushing. We got 55 remains of U.S. servicemen. There are 5,300 of them still in North Korea. It is good for the Americans to get them back, for the families to get our soldiers back. It is good for the North Koreans to get actually cash for it. And it's good for both of us because military to military start talking. The more they're talking, the less chance there are that we're going to get into confrontation. So that's a tangible thing that the president can push through this summit. A second one, if you remember in the first summit, the president used this video that might have been criticized by some, but it was a video about economic opportunity of what can happen to North Korea if we agree on a final agreement on the nuclear track. There's ways to advance that forward. There's ways to make it more tangible, and the fact that they're considering Vietnam for the second summit is very, very important for the North Koreans, because when the US and Vietnam went through the process of normalization before sanctions were removed, American businessmen already went to Vietnam, not to do business, but just to conduct discussions. That was a symbol, a signal of what the future can look. And they might be interested in doing that between North Korea and the US now as well.
Mickey Bergman, Vice President and Executive Director of the Richardson Center for Global Engagement. And Mickey, thanks for doing this. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you.